It was one of those evenings that felt too perfect to be real, the kind where chandeliers sparkle like tiny stars, and laughter fills the air with warmth and wealth. The grand ballroom of the Royal Vienna Hotel shimmered with golden glass, as men in tuxedos and women in elegant gowns floated from one corner to another. Waiters glided around, carrying silver trays with champagne flutes, their faces calm and unreadable. At the center of it all stood the night's main attraction, the world-famous pianist who had come all the way from Paris to perform. His name was Lucas Reinhardt, a man celebrated for his incredible talent and his sharp, charming personality. For years, critics had called him a genius born once in a century, and tonight every seat in the hall was taken just to hear him play. When Lucas sat at the grand piano, the room immediately grew still. He didn't even need to play a note for people to be in awe. His reputation alone filled the silence. Then, with one deep breath, he placed his fingers on the keys and began. The first few notes were soft, almost like whispers, and the crowd leaned in as if afraid to miss even one sound. Within moments, the melody took over the hall, floating gracefully across the air like a story told in music instead of words. People closed their eyes. Some swayed gently. Others smiled, lost in the beauty of it all. Lucas played as if the piano itself was breathing through him. His music was flawless. Every note struck at the perfect moment, every pause filled with meaning. When he finished his final piece, the crowd exploded in applause. Cameras flashed, hands clapped, and a few people even stood up to cheer. Lucas gave a modest bow, his usual charming smile appearing on his face, though deep inside he was used to this kind of attention. As the applause faded, Lucas leaned toward the microphone placed near the piano. He wanted to speak to the audience, to keep them entertained before his next set. He loved the spotlight. It wasn't just about music for him. It was about being seen, being admired. "Thank you, everyone," he said, his voice carrying easily through the grand room. "You're far too kind. I think after playing for so many years, my fingers could use a little break." The crowd laughed softly. Perhaps someone else would like to take over for a few minutes. The audience chuckled, thinking he was joking. But Lucas, scanning the room with playful eyes, continued, "Let's see, maybe one of our guests has hidden talent." His gaze wandered across the hall until it stopped at a table near the back. There sat a woman in a simple navy blue dress, not glamorous like the others, but graceful in her own quiet way. Her hair was neatly tied back, and she wore a small nervous smile as she clapped along with everyone else. Lucas tilted his head toward her, pointing gently with a teasing grin. "You there, miss? Would you like to play a little tune for us?" The spotlight above the piano caught her by surprise, bathing her in soft light. She looked around, unsure if he really meant her. The people at her table laughed lightly, whispering things like, "Oh, go on. It's just a joke, and he's teasing everyone tonight." She smiled politely and shook her head, mouthing, "No, thank you." But Lucas, clearly enjoying the playful moment, stood from his bench and gestured again. "Come now, don't be shy. It's all in good fun. Just one note, perhaps?" The audience was amused. Some clapped softly, encouraging her to go up. Others chuckled, waiting to see what she would do. The woman's cheeks flushed pink, but she remained calm, her hands folded in her lap. She looked down, thinking for a moment, then slowly stood up. Her friends' faces shifted from surprise to confusion. "Are you really going?" One of them whispered. She nodded gently, giving a small smile that seemed to say, "Why not?" As she walked toward the stage, her steps were light but steady. The crowd parted slightly, some smiling, others raising eyebrows. She didn't look like someone who belonged under a spotlight. No expensive jewelry, no air of showmanship. Just a quiet, ordinary woman among the glamorous elite. Lucas greeted her with a grin. "What's your name?" he asked playfully. She hesitated before replying softly, "Elena." "Ah, Elena," Lucas said with exaggerated charm. "A beautiful name. Now tell me, have you ever played before?" She smiled, looking at the grand piano as if it were something both familiar and far away. "A little, but it's been a long time," she said, almost whispering. The audience laughed kindly. Someone joked, "Don't break it," and a few others chuckled. Lucas laughed too. "No pressure, of course," he said, stepping aside. "Let's see what our guest can do." Elena took a slow breath as she sat down at the piano bench. The lights were warm on her face, the air heavy with expectation. Her fingers hovered above the keys but didn't move yet. She could feel the hundreds of eyes watching, waiting for her to stumble or smile awkwardly. For a brief second she thought about backing out, about laughing it off and returning to her seat. But something in her heart told her to stay. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe pride, or maybe something deeper. She had once known this feeling, the heartbeat that matched the rhythm of the piano, the silence before the first note. It had been years, but her soul still remembered. She glanced up at Lucas, who gave her a teasing nod as if to say, "Go ahead, surprise us." Her lips curved into a small smile. "All right," she whispered, mostly to herself. Her fingers touched the keys. The audience leaned forward. A hush fell over the room as if everyone held their breath at once. But before she could play, Lucas leaned toward the microphone again and added jokingly, "Just don't scare us away, all right?" The crowd laughed once more, easing the tension. Elena smiled politely, but her eyes stayed on the keys. The laughter around her didn't reach her heart anymore. She was somewhere else now, somewhere only music could take her. She pressed one soft note, and the sound echoed faintly through the hall. Simple, pure, but somehow different. Lucas raised an eyebrow, amused but curious. She pressed another, then another, and the melody began to form, slow, uncertain, like a memory being gently brought back to life. The crowd, expecting a clumsy mistake or a childish tune, quieted down. Something about the sound was beautiful. There was a softness in it, a kind of emotion that even Lucas, the professional, couldn't quite define. But Elena stopped after a few bars and smiled nervously, saying, "I think that's enough." She stood up, ready to leave. Lucas laughed and clapped. Not bad at all," he said. "You've got courage, I'll give you that." The audience joined in the polite applause. Some thought she was sweet, others thought it was amusing. But Lucas, still smiling, called after her, "You sure that's all?" That sounded like a beginning, not an ending. Elena paused. Something in his tone, half teasing, half challenging, had made her turn back. She looked at the piano, at the seat she had just left. Her eyes softened. "Maybe next time," she said with a faint smile. "Next time?" Lucas grinned. "Well, I'll hold you to that." As she walked back to her seat, a few people patted her shoulder and complimented her bravery. "That was cute," one woman said. "I wouldn't have gone up there for anything." Elena thanked them politely, but her mind was far away. She sat quietly, her fingers still tingling from the brief touch of the piano keys. She felt something awaken inside her, a feeling she hadn't known she still carried. Across the room, Lucas watched her return to her seat. There was a glimmer of curiosity in his eyes now. He had meant it as a joke, a little game to make the audience laugh. But the few notes she had played stuck with him. They weren't perfect, not in a technical sense, but there was emotion in them, something that reached beyond skill. As the evening went on, Lucas continued his performance, dazzling the crowd with fast-paced pieces and complex compositions. The applause grew louder, the admiration stronger, but every now and then, his eyes would wander back to that corner table, to the quiet woman in blue who had dared to sit at his piano. Elena, meanwhile, listened quietly, smiling when others clapped. She wasn't thinking about him anymore. She was thinking about the music, about how it used to make her feel alive, free, connected. She remembered the last time she had truly played, the way the world had disappeared around her. Back then it was her way of speaking without words. Now, as Lucas ended his final performance and took his bows, Elena sat in silence, lost in thought. She didn't notice the crowd standing or the sound of chairs moving. All she could hear was that faint, lingering echo of the piano note she had played, and the quiet whisper in her heart asking her why she had ever stopped. That night, when the guests left and the lights dimmed, Lucas found himself thinking about her again. "Elena," he murmured, testing the name softly. He had played for kings and presidents, performed in every great hall in the world, but for some reason, that ordinary woman, the one who barely touched the piano, had left an impression he couldn't quite shake. He didn't know it yet, but that small, almost forgotten moment on stage would become the start of something far bigger, something that would change both their lives in ways neither of them could have imagined. And somewhere, alone in her quiet apartment, Elena sat by her window, her hands resting on her lap. Her mind replayed the feeling of the piano keys under her fingers. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that comes when you rediscover something you thought was lost forever. The night had ended, but the music, at least for her, had only just begun. The following morning, Elena woke to the soft light of the sun spilling through her curtains. The room smelled faintly of coffee and old paper, the little comforts she had allowed herself over the years. For a moment, she forgot where she was, lost in the lingering memory of last night. The grand ballroom, the sparkling chandeliers, the laughter, and most of all, the piano. She sat up slowly and rubbed her hands over her face. Her fingers tingled still, as if the touch of the keys had left a mark she could feel beneath her skin. She couldn't stop thinking about that single note she had played. It was such a small thing, yet the memory of it felt enormous. Her heart beat a little faster as she remembered the hush that fell over the crowd, the way the air seemed to shift when her fingers pressed down. Elena's life had been quiet for many years. After losing her husband, she had chosen a simple path. She taught music to children at a small community center. Her days were filled with schedules, lesson plans, and the laughter of kids who had never seen a grand piano up close. She didn't perform publicly anymore. The world of glitz and fame felt far away, and in truth, she was content. But last night had stirred something deep inside her, a feeling she had almost forgotten, the thrill of stepping into the spotlight, of letting music flow freely and fearlessly. As she prepared breakfast, Elena thought about the gala again. The people, the grand hall, the famous pianist. It all seemed unreal now that she was back in her modest apartment. She poured coffee into her favorite mug and stared at it for a moment as if hoping the warmth would somehow ground her in reality. But her mind kept returning to the piano. The memory of Lucas Reinhardt's teasing smile made her chuckle softly. She had never met anyone like him before. He carried himself with a kind of charm that could be irritating if one didn't respect his skill. Yet last night, she had seen a flicker of something different in his eyes. Curiosity, maybe even respect. And somehow that made the memory sweeter, tinged with a sense of possibility. By mid-morning, Elena decided to take a walk. The air outside was crisp, carrying the faint smell of flowers from nearby gardens. She wandered through familiar streets, the cobblestones familiar beneath her feet. People greeted her politely, some nodding in passing, but she noticed how she looked at everything differently today. The trees, the sounds of the city. Even the way sunlight hit the buildings, it all seemed sharper, clearer, almost as if last night had awakened her senses. Her thoughts drifted to the gala again, and she found herself replaying each moment with startling detail. The laughter when Lucas first invited her to play, the soft applause after her brief melody, and the way the room had held its breath when her fingers first touched the keys. She remembered how even the famous pianist seemed caught off guard, his usual arrogance softened by surprise. She had never intended to impress anyone. She had simply allowed herself to play, to connect with the piano as she once had. Elena paused in front of a small music store and peered through the window. Pianos of every shape and size were displayed inside, their polished wood gleaming in the morning light. She felt an almost magnetic pull, an urge to go inside and touch the keys again. It had been years since she had allowed herself such indulgence, and yet, the memory of last night made the thought irresistible. Inside the store, she ran her fingers along the keys of a sleek, upright piano. The sound was soft but full, each note resonating in a way that made her heart swell. She closed her eyes and let her fingers move instinctively, playing a few gentle chords. The familiar feeling returned immediately, the connection between her mind, her heart, and the piano. It was like meeting an old friend she had thought she would never see again. The store owner, a kind older man with glasses perched on the edge of his nose, watched her quietly. "You've played before, haven't you?" he asked gently, not wanting to startle her. Elena opened her eyes and smiled softly. "A long time ago," she admitted. "I haven't played in public for years," the man nodded, understanding in his eyes. "But you can tell you know the keys. That's not something you forget." She laughed lightly, almost embarrassed. "I suppose some things never leave you," she said, allowing herself a moment of pride. Later, as she walked back toward her apartment, Elena noticed a small poster for a local music competition. It wasn't glamorous or prestigious, just a simple event held at a community theater. The thought of performing again made her stomach flutter nervously. Could she? Should she? Last night had been spontaneous, playful, but this would be different. People would expect more. She shook her head, trying to push the idea away. Still, a small part of her whispered that maybe it was time to step forward again, to let the music lead her rather than hold her back. By afternoon, Elena had returned home and sat by her window, sipping tea and thinking. She thought about the audience at the gala, the famous pianist, and the surprising hush that had filled the room when she played. She realized something important. She didn't want to impress anyone for fame or recognition. The thrill, the joy came simply from playing, from connecting with the music, letting it flow through her and into the world. That was what mattered. Her phone buzzed, breaking her train of thought. It was a message from one of her friends who had invited her to the gala. "Did you see the look on his face?" The message read. The famous pianist. "He looked completely stunned." Elena smiled softly and typed back a simple, "Yes, I noticed." But as she put the phone down, another thought came to her. What if that moment wasn't just a fleeting surprise? What if it was the beginning of something new? She had spent years hiding her talent, teaching in quiet rooms, always careful not to draw attention. But last night had reminded her how much she loved music. Not teaching, not performing for approval, but the pure, unfiltered act of creating it. She spent the rest of the afternoon practicing in her apartment. She didn't care if anyone heard her. There was no audience, no pressure. Her fingers moved over the keys, relearning old patterns, discovering forgotten chords. Every note felt like a small step back into a world she had missed for too long. By the time evening arrived, her hands ached slightly, but her heart felt lighter than it had in years. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. Her mind replayed the gala over and over. She remembered the applause, the laughter, and the quiet, unspoken respect in Lucas Reinhardt's eyes. She had never performed for someone like him before. Someone who knew music deeply, someone who could recognize talent instantly. And though it had been just a few notes, she sensed that he had seen something in her, something she had kept hidden for far too long. The next morning, news of the gala began circulating on social media. Videos and photos were shared, and people commented on the humorous moment when the famous pianist invited a guest to play. Some laughed at the audacity of it. Others expressed surprise at the unexpected performance. Elena watched the clips cautiously, curious but wary of attention. She didn't want fame or recognition. She simply wanted the music. Yet even as she tried to stay distant, she couldn't ignore the small ripple of excitement growing inside her. For the first time in years, she felt the possibility of something beyond her quiet routine. Something alive, unpredictable, and deeply rewarding. It wasn't about applause or accolades. It was about reclaiming a piece of herself she had thought lost forever. By midweek, she found herself thinking about the piano constantly. Her students noticed a change too. She seemed brighter, more energetic, and when she played during lessons, her fingers moved with confidence and joy. The children sensed it and responded eagerly, laughing and clapping in ways that made her smile. Music had always been a bridge between her heart and the world, but now it felt like a bridge reconnecting her to her own soul. One afternoon, as she returned from the community center, her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize. Hesitant, she answered. "Elena?" a warm voice asked. "This is Lucas Reinhardt. I hope I'm not disturbing you." Elena froze for a moment, her heart skipping a beat. Lucas Reinhardt, the famous pianist, was calling her, personally. "No, not at all," she said softly. "I wanted to thank you again for last night," he continued. "You caught me completely off guard. I've seen many play, but something about the way you approached the piano, it was different. Would you consider coming to play again? Maybe in a more proper setting?" Elena blinked, unsure what to say. The idea of performing publicly again felt overwhelming, yet strangely thrilling. She hesitated, then said, I'd like that. I think I'd like that very much." And just like that, her ordinary life began to shift. Last night's playful challenge had opened a door she hadn't even realized was still there. A door to possibility, to rediscovery, and to a connection with music that was deeper than anything she had felt in years. For the first time in a long while, Elena felt alive in a way that had nothing to do with routine or safety. She felt alive because of the piano, because of the unexpected invitation, and because of a small ordinary choice, a choice to play, even when the world expected her to remain silent. That night, as she went to bed, Elena's fingers itched to touch the keys again. She closed her eyes and imagined the grand piano under her hands, the soft echo of notes filling a vast hall. She smiled in the darkness, knowing that the music would guide her forward. And she knew, deep in her heart, that this was only the beginning. The days following Lucas Reinhardt's call passed in a strange kind of blur for Elena. Her routine, once steady and predictable, now felt different. Each moment was charged with anticipation, the kind that comes when you know something important is about to happen, even if you don't yet know what. The invitation to perform again, this time in a more formal setting, weighed on her mind like both a challenge and a promise. She spent hours pacing her small apartment, her fingers tracing the air as if playing an invisible piano. She could hear the notes in her mind, each one clear and bright, yet demanding more than her hands remembered. It had been years since she had faced an audience, even a small one, and she wondered if the confidence she felt at the gala could survive under the weight of expectation. The following morning, Elena woke early, the city outside her window still quiet and soft in the dawn light. She made herself tea and sat at her little kitchen table, staring out the window while her mind replayed the gala scene again and again. She remembered the hush in the room when she touched the keys, the way Lucas had looked at her, and most vividly, the feeling of music flowing through her fingers as though it had never stopped. She knew she couldn't ignore it. She wanted to play, truly play, and not just for herself but for anyone willing to listen. It wasn't about fame or recognition anymore. It was about reclaiming something she had buried under years of routine and sorrow. And so, with a quiet determination, she decided she would prepare. She would practice, focus, and rediscover the confidence she once had, no matter how long it took. For the next few days, Elena dedicated herself to the piano. She spent hours at her apartment's upright, brushing off old habits and relearning pieces she had loved long ago. Her fingers remembered more than she thought, finding chords and melodies with a precision that surprised her. She played slowly at first, careful not to tire herself, but gradually she allowed herself to speed up, letting the music carry her. The sensation was intoxicating. Each note she pressed felt like a conversation with herself, a gentle reminder of who she had been and who she could still be. It wasn't easy. There were moments when her fingers faltered, when memories of failure whispered in her ear. But she refused to stop. The music had always been a part of her, and now she understood that it was also a path forward. Meanwhile, news of Lucas Reinhardt's gala continued to circulate in small circles. Some attendees spoke of the unexpected moment when a guest had dared to play the piano. Videos of the brief performance had made their way onto social media, shared with laughter and amazement. Some people commented on the humor of the situation, while others marveled at the talent that had unexpectedly appeared. Elena watched these clips cautiously, feeling a mix of embarrassment and pride. She hadn't sought attention, yet the reaction was undeniable. One afternoon, she received another call from Lucas. His voice was warm, tinged with excitement. "Elena, I wanted to see how you're feeling about the performance," he said. "No pressure, of course, but I think you might be ready to play for a small audience soon. Nothing grand, just a private gathering to test the waters." Elena hesitated. I think I could try," she said finally, her voice soft but steady. "I want to." "Good," he replied. "We'll arrange something intimate, just a few people. You'll see, it will be comfortable, and I'll be there to support you." That evening, Elena sat at her piano, the invitation replaying in her mind. She was nervous, yes, but also excited in a way she hadn't felt in years. She realized that her fear wasn't about failing in front of others. It was about stepping back into a world she had willingly left behind, a world of music and performance, of vulnerability and expression. And yet beneath the fear there was a thrill, a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in a long time. When the day of the private gathering arrived, Elena dressed simply, choosing a modest yet elegant outfit that made her feel comfortable. The location was a small, cozy salon in the heart of the city, softly lit and warm. The audience was limited to a handful of people, friends of Lucas, a few music enthusiasts, and of course, Lucas himself. It was intimate, just as he had promised, but even the small setting made Elena's heart race. She took a deep breath before stepping forward. Lucas was already seated at the piano, his hands resting lightly on the keys. He gave her an encouraging nod, a quiet reminder that she was not alone. The room felt charged with expectation, though not in a heavy way. The air was alive with curiosity and anticipation. Elena approached the piano and sat down, feeling the smooth surface beneath her fingers. The keys seemed familiar and foreign all at once, like old friends waiting to greet her. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the silence envelop her, letting herself breathe, letting herself become present. Then she pressed the first note, soft, clear, intentional. The sound echoed gently through the room, and she felt the audience lean forward without even realizing it. She didn't rush. She allowed the music to grow naturally, letting her fingers find the melody, letting her heart guide her movements. As the piece unfolded, Elena began to lose herself in the music. Her fingers moved with grace and precision, the notes flowing effortlessly. Lucas watched silently, his usual air of charm and confidence replaced by something different, awe. The other attendees were captivated as well, their eyes wide, their attention fixed entirely on her. The piece Elena played was not flashy or designed to impress with speed or complexity. It was heartfelt, deliberate, full of emotion and depth. Every pause, every gentle touch of the keys spoke volumes. She wasn't performing to show off skill. She was performing to express herself, to share a part of her soul with the world. When she finished, the room was silent for a heartbeat, as if everyone was absorbing what had just happened. Then slowly applause began, soft at first, then growing louder, until it filled the room completely. Elena looked up, her heart pounding, and saw the smiles on the faces around her. Lucas was clapping too, his expression one of genuine admiration. "You see?" he said quietly, leaning toward her. "That's what I was talking about. That's the music I knew was in you." Elena smiled, feeling a warmth she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't about praise or recognition. It was about connection, about rediscovering a piece of herself that had been dormant for far too long. After the performance, people came forward to speak with her, expressing their amazement, asking how she had developed such emotion in her playing. Elena answered humbly, sharing a few memories of her past experiences, but always returning to the same point. It wasn't about skill alone. It was about feeling, about letting music guide her. The evening ended quietly, with Lucas walking her to the door. "You did more than impress," he said softly. "You reminded everyone what music is really about. You reminded me." Elena nodded, feeling a mixture of humility and pride. She realized then that she didn't need validation from anyone. Not fame, not accolades, not applause. What mattered was the music itself and the way it made her feel alive, whole, and connected. On her walk home, Elena reflected on how far she had come. Just a few days ago, she had been an ordinary woman in her apartment, quietly teaching children and playing music for herself. Now she had taken a step into a world she had left behind, and it had reminded her of a truth she had almost forgotten. Her music mattered not for recognition, but because it was a part of who she was. By the time she reached her apartment, Elena felt a quiet sense of peace. She placed her bag down, sat by the window, and allowed herself to imagine the future. She didn't know where this journey would lead, but for the first time in years, she felt ready to find out. She could feel the music in her hands, in her heart, in the very air around her. It was alive, and so was she. That night, she practiced again, softly, letting her fingers move freely, exploring melodies that had been waiting for her all these years. The piano sang under her touch, each note a reminder that her journey was just beginning. The fear that had once held her back was still there, quiet but manageable, and she welcomed it as part of the process. Elena realized something important. This wasn't about proving herself to anyone else. It was about honoring the gift she had been given, the music that lived within her, and the courage it took to let it out into the world. And as she finally went to bed, her hands still tingling from hours of practice, she knew that tomorrow would bring more challenges, more opportunities, and perhaps more moments that would test her. But she also knew that she was ready. The music had returned, and with it, a part of herself she would never let go again. It was no longer just about a joke at a gala or the surprise of a famous pianist. It was about Elena, her music, and the courage to play, fully, openly, and without fear. The day of Elena's first major public performance finally arrived, and from the moment she woke, a mixture of excitement and nerves filled her chest. The sun streamed gently through her window, painting the walls with soft light, but it did little to calm her racing thoughts. Today would be different from the private gathering, different from the brief notes at the gala. Today she would play for an audience who didn't know her, who had never seen her touch the keys. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. She sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea staring into its warmth. Her hands rested on her lap, but they seemed to vibrate with anticipation. She replayed the past week in her mind, the way Lucas Reinhardt had called her, his encouragement, the private performance that had gone better than she could have imagined. All of it had led to this moment. She reminded herself that she didn't need to be perfect. She only needed to play with honesty, to let the music speak. Elena dressed carefully, choosing a simple, elegant dress that made her feel both comfortable and confident. She did not want anything flashy. This was about the music, not appearances. She took a deep breath, smoothed her hair, and stepped out into the crisp morning air. The city was alive with people bustling through streets, but her mind was elsewhere, focused entirely on the piano waiting for her. The venue was a small theater, intimate yet grand in its own way. Soft lighting illuminated the stage, and the audience seats were arranged close enough to feel personal but far enough to give her space. Lucas had been right. It was a comfortable setting designed to help her ease into public performance. A few assistants guided her backstage, and she took a quiet moment alone, standing in the dim light with the piano just a few steps away. Elena felt her heart pound as she approached the piano. She rested her hands on the keys, letting her fingers feel their familiar texture. The instrument seemed alive beneath her touch, waiting patiently for her to begin. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting herself breathe, letting the room fade away. She remembered the feeling from the private gathering, the connection between her and the piano, the way music flowed naturally when she allowed herself to feel it deeply. The audience had begun to settle, a low murmur of conversation filling the theater until Lucas gave a gentle nod. Elena took her seat at the piano bench, her hands hovering over the keys. She pressed the first note, soft but clear, and the room went silent almost instantly. The hush was powerful, almost tangible, and she felt a thrill run through her body. She wasn't performing for applause or recognition. She was performing to share something that had been quiet inside her for years. As she continued, her fingers moved with confidence and grace. The piece she had chosen was complex yet familiar, one that allowed her to express emotion through each chord and pause. Every note carried intention. Every pause held meaning. The audience leaned forward, drawn into the music without even realizing it. Some closed their eyes, others sat frozen, captivated. Elena lost herself in the performance. She didn't think about the audience, the theater, or even Lucas watching from the front row. She thought only about the music, letting it flow from her heart through her fingers and into the room. Each melody told a story, of longing, of memory, of hope rediscovered. She could feel the emotion ripple through her hands, connecting with something far beyond herself. The theater was silent for minutes that felt like hours. Every note resonated, filling the room with a depth that was impossible to ignore. Lucas leaned forward slightly, his eyes wide with admiration. He had performed in countless grand halls, seen countless musicians, but there was something different about Elena's playing. It was not just technical skill. It was authenticity, honesty, and a vulnerability that moved him profoundly. When she reached the final notes, Elena allowed them to linger, soft and trembling, like a whisper fading into the air. The silence held for a heartbeat, as if the room itself were absorbing what had just happened. Then slowly a single clap sounded, followed by another, and another. The applause grew steadily until it filled the theater, overwhelming in its intensity. Elena looked up, startled, and saw the smiles on the faces around her. Some were teary-eyed, some wide with awe. Lucas was clapping too, his expression a mixture of pride and amazement. Elena rose from the bench, her hands still tingling from the intensity of the performance. She gave a small bow, her heart still racing, and allowed herself to feel the warmth of the audience's appreciation. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of belonging in the world she had once loved. A world of music, expression, and connection. After the performance, the audience came forward, eager to speak with her. People shared how moved they had been, how the music had reached places inside them they hadn't expected. Some asked about her past, how she had learned to play with such emotion and skill. Elena answered humbly, sharing pieces of her story. The years of study, the time spent teaching children, and the loss that had kept her away from public performance. But she always returned to the same point. The music was what mattered, and she played to share it, not to impress. Backstage, Lucas approached her with a quiet smile. "You did more than anyone could have imagined," he said softly. "You reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place." Elena smiled, feeling a warmth she had not known in years. It was not just the words, but the recognition that her music had truly touched someone who understood it deeply. That night, Elena walked home slowly, the streets bathed in soft evening light. She thought about the performance, replaying it in her mind. She had been nervous, yes, but as the first note left her fingers, all doubt had vanished. She realized something important. The music was not about fear or perfection. It was about allowing herself to feel, to connect, and to share that connection with others. She returned to her apartment and sat by the piano, letting her hands rest on the keys. The theater, the applause, and the audience were behind her, but the feeling remained. The music was alive in her as if it had never left. She played softly, exploring melodies that came to her naturally, letting each note carry a piece of her heart. The next few days were filled with reflection and planning. Invitations came for small performances, collaborations, and opportunities to share her music in other venues. Elena took each one slowly, carefully, choosing what felt right. She had learned a valuable lesson. The journey was hers, and she would move at her own pace, guided by the music and by the joy it brought. She also noticed something else, a growing sense of confidence and courage. She no longer feared stepping into new spaces, no longer hesitated when an opportunity presented itself. The piano had always been a part of her, but now it felt like an extension of her spirit, a way to express what words could never capture. One evening, Lucas invited her to dinner, a simple gathering to celebrate her performance. As they sat across from each other, sharing stories and laughter, Elena realized how much had changed in such a short time. What had begun as a joke, a playful invitation at a gala, had grown into something transformative. It was not just the public recognition or the applause. It was the rediscovery of herself, her talent and her courage. During dinner, Lucas leaned back and said quietly, "I always knew you had something special. But last night you reminded everyone what music truly is. You reminded us that it's not about skill alone. It's about heart, and you have more heart in your fingertips than most have in their lifetime." Elena smiled, touched by his words, but also humbled. She knew the truth in them, yet she also knew it was not about praise. It was about authenticity, about letting the music flow freely, and about trusting herself to share it without fear. As she walked home that night, Elena felt a sense of peace she had not known in years. The city lights reflected softly in the windows, and she thought about the journey that had brought her here. The gala, the private gathering, the first major public performance. Each step had been a challenge, a test, and a gift. And through it all, she had learned to trust herself, her music, and the power of simply showing up and playing. Back in her apartment, she played one final piece before bed, a melody that had been with her since she was a child. The notes filled the room softly, a gentle reminder of the love and passion that had always been inside her. She closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her, and for the first time in a long while she felt complete. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new performances. But tonight Elena allowed herself to rest, to savor the joy of the music, and to feel the quiet triumph of reclaiming a part of herself that had been hidden for too long. And as she finally turned off the lights and let the quiet settle, Elena knew one thing with certainty: the music would guide her forward, and she was ready to follow wherever it led. The weeks after her first major performance were unlike anything Elena had experienced in years. Invitations began to arrive from small venues, community events, and even local media outlets who had heard of her sudden rise from quiet school teacher to a musician who could move an audience with ease. At first she hesitated, unsure if she wanted to step into the spotlight more than she already had. But each time she thought about the music, about the thrill of connecting with people through her fingers, her doubts began to fade. One day, she received a message from Lucas Reinhardt. He had arranged a special event, a gala to raise funds for music education, and he wanted Elena to perform. The audience would be larger, more distinguished, and expectations would naturally be high. But he assured her it would be supportive, filled with people who appreciated music and sincerity above all else. Elena stared at the message for a long time. The thought of standing in front of a crowd again made her heart pound, but it also stirred something deep inside her. She had grown since the first night at the gala, since the private performance, and since her small public debut. She realized she had nothing to prove to anyone. This was her music, and she had the right to share it. The day of the gala arrived, and Elena woke with a mixture of nerves and anticipation. The city was alive with soft morning light, birds singing outside her window. She made herself a cup of tea and sat quietly, imagining the piano awaiting her, imagining the music flowing freely from her heart through her hands. She reminded herself that this was not a performance for judgment. It was a chance to share something real, something honest. Dressing for the evening, she chose a gown that was simple yet elegant. Nothing flashy, nothing that would distract from her music. She wanted the attention to be on the sound, not the appearance. When she arrived at the venue, the grand hall was filled with anticipation. The chandeliers sparkled, and the soft chatter of the crowd created a gentle hum of energy. The stage was set, the piano waiting, and she felt that familiar tug in her chest, the mix of fear and excitement that came with every meaningful performance. Backstage, Lucas gave her a reassuring smile. "Remember," he said softly, "this is about the music. Let it flow naturally. You've prepared. You're ready." Elena nodded, feeling her nerves ease slightly. His confidence in her reminded her of the first time he had seen her play. The curiosity, the recognition of something deeper. When she walked onto the stage, the audience's murmur faded as they noticed her presence. She moved to the piano, her fingers brushing lightly against the keys. She sat down, closed her eyes, and took a slow breath. This was the moment she had been preparing for, the culmination of weeks of practice, rediscovery, and courage. The first note sounded, soft and deliberate, filling the hall with a clear, resonant tone. The audience leaned forward without realizing it, drawn into the music as it began to weave its story. Elena allowed herself to feel every note, every pause, every chord. The melody rose and fell like waves, carrying emotion in its rhythm, drawing the listeners into a world that existed only in the music. Her fingers danced over the keys with a fluidity that surprised even her. Years of teaching, years of quiet practice, and the small awakenings of the past few weeks had come together perfectly. The hall was silent yet alive as the audience absorbed every sound. Lucas sat nearby, watching in quiet awe, seeing the woman he had first teased at a gala now commanding a stage with grace and authenticity. As the piece grew in intensity, Elena felt herself completely immersed. She wasn't thinking about mistakes, applause, or judgment. She was thinking only about the music, letting it guide her. The notes carried her emotions, the loss she had endured, the joy she had rediscovered, and the courage it had taken to return to the piano. Every listener could feel it, even if they didn't know her story. The music spoke for her. When she reached the climax of the piece, the notes soared with power and delicacy at the same time. The audience was captivated. Some held their breath, others leaned forward, eyes wide with amazement. It was as if time had paused, leaving only Elena and the piano, a silent conversation between heart and hand. She felt a deep connection to everyone listening, as though her emotions had bridged the gap between stage and audience effortlessly. The final notes were soft, trembling, fading into a gentle silence. For a moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, applause began, gentle at first, then growing louder and louder until it filled the hall. The sound was overwhelming, not just in volume but in emotion. People rose to their feet, cheering, clapping, some wiping tears from their eyes. Elena rose from the bench, hands still trembling slightly, and gave a deep, humble bow. Lucas approached her quietly, his eyes shining. "You've done more than anyone could have imagined," he whispered. "You've reminded everyone why they fell in love with music, and you've reminded me too." Elena smiled softly, feeling a warmth that went beyond pride. It wasn't about recognition. It was about sharing something deeply human, something that touched hearts without words. After the performance, people came forward to speak with her. Some were musicians themselves, some were simply music lovers, but each carried the same sentiment. They had been moved in a way they couldn't fully describe. One woman, tears in her eyes, said simply, "I don't know your story, but your music reached me." Elena held her hand gently. overwhelmed by the power of that simple statement. Backstage, she found herself alone for a moment, breathing in the quiet. She placed her hands lightly on the piano keys, remembering every step that had led her here, the quiet life she had lived, the small private gatherings, the encouragement from Lucas, and her own courage to keep going. She realized that the journey was more important than the destination. Each challenge, each note played had brought her closer to herself. That evening, as the gala continued around her, Elena felt a sense of peace she had not known in years. She walked through the hall, receiving congratulations, but she carried with her the quiet knowledge that her music had done more than entertain. It had connected hearts, inspired courage, and reminded people of the beauty that exists when someone allows themselves to be vulnerable. Later that night, walking home, Elena reflected on everything that had happened. She remembered the gala where it all began, the playful invitation, the brief notes that had changed so much. She realized that the seemingly small, insignificant moments in life often lead to the most profound transformations. A joke, a challenge, a single note played with honesty. It had all led her here. At her apartment, she sat at her piano once more. The house was quiet, the city sleeping outside her window. She played softly, exploring melodies that had come to her naturally, letting each note carry her story. She felt no pressure, no expectation, only the pure joy of music. And in that moment, she understood fully. This was her gift, her voice, and nothing could take it away. Elena's journey had begun with hesitation, a brief joke, and a single note. It had led her through fear, rediscovery, and triumph. And now, as she played into the quiet night, she knew that this was only the beginning. Music had returned to her life, stronger and more beautiful than ever, and she would follow it wherever it led. In the end, Elena had not only impressed the world with her talent, she had rediscovered herself. She had faced fear, embraced vulnerability, and allowed her heart to guide her fingers. The applause, the admiration, and the recognition were secondary. What mattered most was that she had found her voice, her courage, and her place in the world once again. And as she played the final notes that night, letting them fade gently into silence, Elena smiled, knowing that she had arrived not just as a musician, but as a woman who dared to believe in herself, who dared to play, and who had touched the hearts of everyone who listened. The journey had been long, the path uncertain, but the music had led her home.